Welcome to the Spirit-Led Men at Work podcast, where I interview Christian men from all walks of life with varying job titles who have one thing in common. They are all choosing daily to be led by the Holy Spirit at their work. And because of that, they are leading, prospering, glorifying God, and experiencing joy and purpose in their work. And you can too. I'm very excited to bring to you episode number 3 of the Spirit-Led Men at Work podcast. This is Dave Hilgendorf. Today I am going to be sharing an interview I did with Chris Patton. Chris is president of the Mike Patton Auto Family in LaGrange, Georgia, operators of Honda, Ford, Lincoln, Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, and Ram franchises. Along with his brother and partner Brian, Chris is a third-generation owner and grew up working in every department in the business beginning at the age of 10. He assumed his current position as president and CEO in 2000. The Mike Patton Auto Family has approximately 100 employees and retailed over 2,000 new and used vehicles in 2015. Chris also writes a blog called Christian Faith at Work. He's writing it to business owners and leaders who are trying to figure out how to integrate their Christian faith into their businesses. By including the resources accumulated over the past 9 years of learning to use the business as a vehicle for ministry, as well as real-life examples from his experiences, Chris teaches readers how to run their business from an eternal perspective. Chris and his wife, Kim, live in LaGrange, Georgia, with their 3 children. Let's get right to the interview. Chris, thanks so much for joining us. Before we get started, I just want to say a special thanks to you because I'm new at this podcasting thing, and this is, I don't know how many times we've tried this. We've had some technical glitches, some scheduling glitches, and you've been faithful to keep at it. So I just wanted to publicly praise you for that before we get started.
It has definitely been a challenge, Dave.
It has.
I get that, but glad to be able to do it, and still honored to be here.
All right, excellent. Well, let's get started with my first question, which is describe for our listeners how and when you became a Christian.
All right. Well, I was 10 years old, grew up in the church. Family always was at church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and was actually at my grandmother's house and had just watched a program on TV, started asking her questions, and she just answered my questions and said, "You want to kneel down right here and pray?" And I did it right there. I was on her green vinyl couch. I'll never forget it.
Thank God for good grandmas.
Absolutely.
Huh? That's great. A simple but an awesome story there. All right. Well, my next question is, now I've heard you speak before, and of course you and I have now spoken several times, right. But this concept of silhouettes is just really key to your story. So why don't you start out by telling us a little bit about what kind of business you're in and what you do, and then from there talk to us about this concept of silhouettes and why that's so important for you.
Sure. Well, Dave, as you know, I'm in the car business and I'm a Christian, which is, I guess that could be rare. But I'm actually a third generation partner in the family business. We've got 3 dealerships in LaGrange, Georgia, about an hour south of Atlanta. Roughly 100 employees. I've been running the operation for about 15 years now. And basically one day, or I guess I shouldn't say one day, it's over a period of time, but I came to realize that God wanted more from me than just Sundays, and started trying to figure out what did that look like. I was in business, and I thought that had to remain separate from my faith. And over a period of time, I came to realize that God put me in business in this position at the head of this company to impact people through that business and do ministry through that business. And as I was trying to figure out what that meant, what that looked like, I was looking through the Bible, and I was trying to find clues as to what does the business look like that is impacting others for eternity. And I came across 1 Corinthians 3, which is where Paul is talking about laying the foundation of Christ for those believers at Corinth. And on that foundation, we build, some using wood, hay, stubble, and straw, others using precious stones, gems, that kind of thing. And basically, whatever we build in this life on top of that foundation of Christ is going to be tested by God's fire on that day, on Judgment Day. And as I'm reading this, I'm picturing we've got roughly 19 acres of land with the 4 buildings on there, and typical Saturday, we've got cars, balloons, people, there's activity everywhere, and it really looks active. And then I pictured that being tested by God's fire. And in a flash, there's nothing. There are no buildings, no cars, no steel racks that the cars sit up on, no balloons, no people, no nothing. It's just 19 acres of scorched earth, because God's fire would absolutely consume everything. And then the very next image I got was on that 19 acres, there were hundreds, maybe thousands of silhouettes. And I realized that those were silhouettes. Those silhouettes represented people that were impacted for eternity because of the way we operated our business. And that my job description at that point became a 2-word, very simple job description: add silhouettes. And so from that day forward, I began to try, with my brother as a partner and other members of the leadership team, to structure the business and operate it in a way that would impact people for eternity, point them toward God, so that at the end, when that business is tested by fire, that I would maximize the number of silhouettes.
Awesome. So it just gave you a whole different perspective on something that you had already been doing for a while.
Exactly.
After you kind of had that new perspective on things, you had a change in how you approach the business. And I want to talk about kind of the process of how change occurs within a business like this. But first, maybe kind of give us a snapshot of where you are now, because I know that this has changed your business and how you approach things in many ways. Just list for us a few of the ways that I guess you could say you live out your faith through your auto dealership.
Gotcha. So we tried for the first couple of years, we changed our entire selling system. In fact, it was 6 months after I really understood what God was leading us to do that we moved to a one-price selling system. So we changed our compensation plans. We went from a commission-based plan for the salespeople to a flat pay plan where they're paid regardless of what type of car or how much profit the dealership makes. They're paid a flat. So they're incentivized to sell the car that best meets the customer's needs, not the one that pays the salesperson more. And so we changed that right off the bat. And over time, we added little bits and pieces of, I'll call it ministry, through the business. For example, within a couple of years, we rewrote our mission statement, our vision statement, our core values, and made sure that those were faith-based and reflected that our business was God's and that that's what we were in business to do, was to honor Him. We hired a chaplain, went in partnership with a company called Corporate Chaplains of America, and we have a chaplain that comes to the business 2 times a week, goes across all 4 buildings, and effectively touches every employee once a week. That chaplain also leads 2 Bible studies, one on a Thursday at lunch where we provide the food, and then again on Friday morning we provide biscuits. And those are voluntary, but he leads 2 Bible studies that are not churchy or overly spiritual, but absolutely meet the people, the employees right where they are. Because in any given business, even in Georgia and the Bible Belt, there are anywhere from 50 to 70% of the employees that are not churched. And so we wanted Bible studies that would give them something that they could handle and could embrace, but did not push too hard, I guess I would say. And then let's see some other things. We do a New Testament copy in the glove box of every vehicle that we sell and deliver. It's called, the cover says Owner's Manual for Life. And we've got a little note in there that says, we believe this is the best book you'll read. And we just leave it in the glove box for the customer. Don't tell them about it. Let them just find it. And that's been a very effective way just to spread the word. We've got the Gospel of John. We've got little pocket testaments in our waiting areas. for service customers and sales customers. I go through every department once a month and lead a devotion. Again, it's a kind of a real world illustration that then I bring in some spiritual truth, and I try to stick to business topics or things that are the employees will understand, that meet them right where they are, but also bring in spiritual truth and point them to God every month, including the gospel. We do new hire training. Every new hire gets orientation, where I teach a 1-hour training session on our mission, vision, values, the biblical why behind what we do. We have an employee crisis fund, so the employees contribute to it. The dealership helps as well, and that money goes to fund other employees that come up on a financial crisis. So I could go on, but I think that gives you a good idea.
It does, and I appreciate you and I know that's not all inclusive, but I appreciate you giving us a sense of all the different, really creative ways that you're integrating your faith into the business. Right. And I would like to dig into a few of these in some detail, but before I do that, I wanted to ask if you could just talk about the process of this transformation, you might say. I mean, as you and I have discussed before, this isn't something that happens overnight. So maybe for the business owners out there, or even non-business owners, can you talk a little bit about your journey in terms of how this has worked its way along, and you know, has it been a lot of, would you say, trial and error, or just talk about the process?
Well, sure. You're exactly right. This does not happen overnight. I'll say that I thought it would when I first started. This was back in 2003 when I got the visual picture of the silhouettes, and in 2004 we made the decision to change our selling system to the one price model. And I literally thought, Dave, that should take us 30 to 60 days, and then we'll move on to start adding some of these ministry ideas that I had. And that one transition to the one price model took us 18 months. And I just completely missed the difficulty in change, especially when it's something as ingrained as negotiating car deals. I just completely underestimated the rate at which people can change. And so my point there is it's been 13 years now of us piece by piece, bit by bit, adding in little things. And so my advice would be, if someone's in business, just getting started in this kind of thing, is pick one thing, make sure you think it through, get your team involved, leadership team of some sort, and implement that one thing, whatever it is. Start simple, but make sure it's right. Don't try to do the shotgun approach and throw as many things out there as you can and hope some of them stick, but just take them one at a time, make sure they're right, make sure that they are effective in doing the ministry or achieving the results you want before moving on to the next one. Because we tried that first one, I thought literally 30, 60 days, and I had this slew of ideas coming behind it. Well, those ideas, I couldn't even work on them for the first 18 months. And then one at a time, because I did learn, I needed to slow down. And one at a time, we'd put one in place, trial and error. Sometimes they'd work, sometimes they wouldn't. And you got to be able to make that decision fairly quickly, not too quickly, but you don't need to let it drag out. And employees see you try something, it doesn't work, and you just leave it, and you act like it's still going on, they lose confidence, and you lose credibility. So make the decision, cut it, and move on and try something different. But don't get overly impatient. Don't look for something to happen too quickly. It's just not going to work well if it does.
Did you get frustrated during those 18 months?
Oh, my God. Yes. That could be another 3-podcast series, just the frustrations of mine during that 18 months. That was, business-wise, the worst 18 months of my career, without a doubt. Our profitability went from well above average for our size to way below. In fact, it was at the bottom. I mean, we were losing money for a good period of that 18 months. And I lost a lot of confidence in myself. My team was looking at me for direction, and I was frustrated there. But I kept a New Testament with Psalms in my back pocket, and I'd go hide in the bathroom for 20, 30 minutes at a time. And I had handpicked some Psalms where David was saying things I thought, or the things he was saying is what I was thinking. And I just would read and reread and reread and just hang on. And 18 months later, we came out of it.
Well, I was just going to ask you kind of what you look to for inspiration, and you just partly answered that question.
Sure.
What would you say that you had any models to follow with this, or I mean, what made you decide this was the first thing you were going to take on?
It was the first thing because it was a series of things that I was reading and learning. There's a verse in Proverbs. First of all, I read a book called Doing Business by the Book by Larry Burkett, which I would recommend to anybody that is a believer in business. Even if you don't think what I'm talking about makes sense, but you still want to run your business in an ethical, moral way, that book is phenomenal. Burkett said, take the book of Proverbs and read with your business glasses on. And I'd never thought of that before. So he said, just act like that book is a business guide and read it as if it's speaking directly to your business. Well, chapter 1 talks about says, son, if those around you try to entice you to come in and join them and take loot and ambush somebody and fill their homes with all the loot that they'll get from this person, innocent person. And instantly I'm reading this and I'm seeing a car deal. And so I didn't even get through the first chapter of Proverbs before I embarked on an 18-month transition. So for me, when I was clear that God was leading it and he had put it in front of me, if it had been 36 months, as long as I was allowed to stay in that position, I would have continued on that path because I knew he was behind it and he was going to make it good. So absolutely, I had the Psalms I mentioned, but I was following what I thought was, and still do believe was basic scriptural truth. I also had a consultant that was helping us through the logistics of the dealership selling model change. I also had a business group, not of believers, so I had to kind of discern their wisdom and kind of make sure it matched up with Scripture. But I had a group of kind of advisors in business that were helping me make decisions and helping me see where some of the weaknesses were. So I would definitely advise others to reach out, find people to advise you. First choice is godly, wise individuals, especially those if they're in business that can help. And otherwise, God can speak through anybody, and he absolutely did.
Oh, that's great. Now, some of these other ministry opportunities that you pursued weren't maybe quite as large in scale and complexity, but no less important. How did you measure success on those? Like you said, if it didn't work, you had to make the decision not to. It's a little bit different than maybe a purely a profit idea where you can measure it with dollars and cents. How did you measure success for these other areas? So,
for example, the chaplain program, we signed on with the corporate chaplains back in 2007, and the first 6 months we had a chaplain that was new and ended up leaving the chaplain program because he just found that was not what he was gifted to do. And at that point I was questioning because he had not been that effective, but I still believed in the program. And so I let them send a second chaplain down to take over our business. And that gentleman's name was Mike. And in the first 2 or 3 months of him being there, I had employees making comments to me, thank you so much for this program. I had one of their benefits of corporate chaplains is they send you a monthly report of the metrics. So they do measure the things they can, which are how many phone calls did we get from employees to the chaplain during this 1 month period? How many after hours counseling sessions did they request and did we execute? And things like that. No names, just numbers. And when I saw the reports and the results in that area take off, I knew we had something that was working. And then I, over the last several years, have come to see Mike as my chaplain as well and one of my best friends. So he still can't tell me anything about anything he talks about with the employees, but I use him as my chaplain. So I could watch metrics there. An example of one I could not watch metrics was my devotion. So every month I was leading a devotion in the sales department prior to making this change of perspective and doing ministry through the business. I just did that as something that I felt was very simple and needed, but it was not very spiritual. So I would do a devotion that was somewhat inspirational or feel good, but not spiritual based. When my perspective changed, I went much more aggressively toward spiritual truths and clear-cut gospel presentations in that devotion. And I expanded it from just the sales meeting once a month to going around the dealership to every department that same day and effectively speaking to probably 85-90% of the employees each month. And the way I gauged the effectiveness of that was, one, watching their eyes and seeing, are they falling asleep? We're only talking about 5 or 10 minutes, but are they engaged or are they staring at their phones? What's the results? What's the impact? And I felt I was getting good response with their eyes, and in many cases comments after the fact. Man, I really appreciate you doing that. I really appreciate you saying that. I've never heard this at a place I've worked before. And then I also would find that if I missed the scheduled day to do it for some reason, I had 5-10 people coming up to me the next day or 2 or 3 saying, hey, when are you going to do the devotion again? You didn't do it this past Monday. So you got to figure out a different way for each piece that you're implementing. But for me, those were pretty easy to see, and therefore we've continued them.
That sounds great. We've talked a little bit about how, of course, you're always going to have some negative reaction to some of these things no matter what you do. What would you say the ratio is as far as feedback, both from employees as well as customers, in terms of positive feedback versus negative feedback?
Well, I am fortunate, I think, in the fact that we are in the Bible Belt. So in Georgia, there's just not a lot of pushback. What you see on TV with regards to people pushing back on Christian faith and trying to eliminate it from schools and eliminate it from the workplace, it's just not as strong a movement in Georgia. So we've done a number of things that in other areas have drawn criticism. I have a dealer friend in California that does a very Christ-centered Christmas advertisement on TV the week or so before Christmas and the week or so after Christmas, and in California. And he gets, one time I called him and it was, the day after Christmas, he said he's already had 30 or 40 complaints, phone calls from customers saying that they would not come back to visit him or to buy from him because of his Christian faith. Now, I said, his name's Chris also. I said, Chris, how do you handle that? He said, I count those as in my favor. He said, I'm doing what I know I'm supposed to be doing, and when I'm facing that kind of complaint or that kind of pushback, I feel like I'm doing the right thing. So he had that approach. For us, I've run that same ad with our business for the last 5 years. I've not had a single complaint. It's 100% positive.
Oh, wow.
The Bible's in the glove box. I've had one complaint from one lady who said, I am a believer, I am a churchgoer, I just don't think you should put anything in my glove box. And I said, ma'am, you are free to bring that back by here, or you can throw it in the trash can. It's all up to you. We just offer it for free, and we felt like it's something we could give and would bring value. So that's the only complaint I've had. So
that's funny.
It is. And I've had employees. One I remember that we hired in sales that was a Jehovah's Witness. And when he was in sales, had just been hired maybe 2 or 3 days earlier, when he heard, hey, you're going to hear a lot about the Christian faith here. So he and I sat down, I went through it with him, and I assured him that it would not impact his advancement, it would not impact his compensation or his effectiveness or livelihood. And over the next 1.5 to 2 years, he was able to progress. He moved into management. He did a great job. He was morally sound and committed to his faith. But we do not require anything of them. We don't require them to believe what we believe. We just make sure that the word is put out there, and they can take it or not. But so far, I've not had anybody seriously challenge me on anything like this.
That's interesting what your friend said, that he actually viewed that as a positive.
Absolutely.
Because he knew, I guess, we were promised we'd be persecuted, so I guess he just knows he's doing the right thing then.
That's the way he sees it.
Of all the different things that you do in this regard, what gets you the most just personally excited, or what do you enjoy the most of all the different ministries?
Wow, that's a good question. I think one of the most effective is the chaplain's program. But because of the nature of it, I don't get to participate in seeing all the wins. I've seen it up close when it's affected me, when the chaplain's been there with me. One time in particular, we had a sales manager, 46 years old, died of a heart attack on the showroom floor in front of everybody. And I followed the ambulance to the hospital hoping he was going to survive, and the chaplain met me there. And he was sitting right beside me as I had to tell the mother of this employee that he had passed, and the wife as well. And so I've seen firsthand how impactful that chaplain program can be. He's also led three separate memorial services for employees that have died while employed at the business. And he's led those memorial services in the showrooms. And I've seen the employees come forward, tears flowing and sharing the love that they had for this employee or the impact they had or whatever. I've seen family members come to us afterwards and just thank us profusely for the service itself, and also for everyone sharing in all that was done. So that excites me a lot. The devotion that I lead every month, I get to see firsthand the eyes. They're all on me, and I see the eyes that are lit up and the ones that are excited. And then I see those that are not so much. And I know, hey, I need to work a little bit on that one. But that one excites me because I'm engaged firsthand. I'm right there on the front line. So two very different experiences for me, but those are probably my two favorite.
Yeah. Do you mind sharing the name of the organization? Maybe you already mentioned that.
Corporate Chaplains of America. And I think it's chaplain.org.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah, I mean, that excites me, too, every time you talk to me about that program, just knowing that that's available. That's great.
Absolutely.
My next question is, some people would make the argument, whether it's in business or in any other part of life, that faith is a private matter. Right. It's not something that's appropriate even to be sharing in such an overt way. What would you say to someone who said that?
Well, I certainly have heard that and understand the position. So I will not tell anybody they're just dead wrong. I feel differently, but they have the right to their opinion. So the first thing I would suggest is that they get in the Word. And if they will read the Bible, I believe they will find a different perspective. So the first verse I go to that's just a verse that is burned into my brain is 1 John 2:6. And it says, whoever claims to live in him, Jesus, must live as Jesus did, or must walk as Jesus did. And while there were times when Jesus would stifle people talking about him, or the demons calling him by name, that was because of the timing of it. But as soon as he started preaching, he was crystal clear about his message. He was not hiding. He was not holding back. And then when he gave the Great Commission to the disciples, it was not, on Sundays or talk about this among your friends, but it was go and make disciples of all nations. And you look at Matthew 5, where in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus talked about how we are to be a city on the hill, a light of the world. And none of these verses or none of these passages give me any semblance of the idea that we should be private or quiet about our faith. Now, I think we need to be wise, and I'm not going to take a bullhorn and go into a mosque or somewhere else and try to stir stuff up and scream about my faith. But I just simply believe we are to be outwardly obvious about our faith, and we should live it out, talk about it, share it, and approach those that don't have it and try to make disciples of them as well.
Well, and there's a lot at stake, isn't there?
There is.
You know.
If you believe it, there is.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I had heard a comment it was from an atheist. I think it was from a Ray Comfort special that I saw, where the atheist said, if you are a Christian and you truly believe what you believe, that I'm going to hell, and you don't try to talk to me about it,
what does that say?
How much worse of a human being could you be, right?
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah, and I always think about that when I think about that issue. So, well, where do you see your business going in the next few years in this regard as it relates to ministry?
That's a great question. I don't know. So I'll start by saying that I have dedicated this year personally to try to figure out what God has in mind next. I've put some extra pages on my website. I've stepped out and done some speaking. I've done some coaching. I've pushed into some other areas and done some writing in some other magazines. I'm really trying to feel out what God has in mind, because while I know my job description in 03 became ad silhouettes, I also know that over the last 6 to 12 months, while I've had those additional resources out there, I've been getting calls and emails and opportunities to speak into the lives of other business owners. And I've started to think that God's changing it from ad silhouettes to multiply silhouettes. And the multiply is, if I can teach a business owner, I spent 30 minutes on the morning, or 40 minutes this morning on the phone with a young business owner who's 1 year into his new business that he went out on his own and started, and he's serious about his faith, but just doesn't understand how to combine the two. And we spent 30, 40 minutes talking through it, and I gave him some of the things that I've learned along the way. If that guy turns and starts doing business the way I think he can and starts impacting people, he's adding silhouettes. I've just multiplied some. And so I don't know exactly what I will be doing or what our business will be doing to create that, but I know that our impact is going to, or our perspective is going to change on how we impact. We're going to be continue to add silhouettes in our business, but then try to leverage what we're doing to teach other businesses how to do the same thing.
Yeah, and obviously I think about what Jesus did with his disciples.
Same thing.
Yeah, same concept. So,
yep.
Well, it seems like a logical next step to me. So, well, let's move into what I call the spirit round, where I ask you some questions, basically the same questions I ask everybody I interview, and they're all related to the topic of work. My first question is, what is the greatest misunderstanding in your mind that men have about their work?
I think that's a clear one, at least for me. I think most men get their identity from their work, and they believe it's a measure of their value. When I first meet somebody, or you see two guys meet and they don't know each other, one of the very first questions is, so what do you do? What kind of work do you do? And they're sizing each other up in a small way. And men tend to think, if I'm not successful or if I'm not in a certain position or whatever, then I don't have much value, or I don't have a great identity, I guess. And I think that's just absolutely not true. I think God gives us our identity. I think we are children of His, regardless of what work we do. And I think if we can shift our mindset to understand that we are His children, we have an inheritance that we can't even imagine, and that our identity comes from Him, our value comes from Him, then we can approach our work in different ways. We're freed up to change the way we go into our workplace and change the way we handle our business, because it no longer determines how valuable we are. And I think I would encourage anybody who's typically been thinking that way, change that mindset, take your work and your faith, combine them, and see what happens.
It could be a freeing concept, I think, to kind of lay that burden aside, that where you kind of put it on your work to be your identity.
Sure. And I think it's something we've got to remind ourselves of, Dave. It's not a once and done learning. I can tell you that. You can say, you know what, I agree with that. But then tomorrow or the next day, someone steps into the picture that makes you feel less valuable or lower identity, whatever it is. And you got to remind yourself, no, we're on equal ground as far as God's concerned. I've got my identity and my value from him. That constant reminding eventually will get to where it's second nature, but it takes a while.
That's an excellent point about that. All right, my next question is, a lot of us, at some point, we deal with someone at work that we have to work with that is a difficult person to work with. Tell us about, you don't have to name names, of course, but an example of someone who is difficult that you've had to deal with in the workplace and how you dealt with them in a way that that your faith inspired you to deal with them.
That's a tough question. I get to deal with a lot of good people. I would say for us, I won't use any individuals specifically, but I've had some difficult people, and I think the thing that I had to do is continue to remind myself that whether I knew what the motivations were or not, they had reasons for acting the way they did. And I've taken some training in personality wiring, personality profile tests, those kind of things. And that's helped a lot. The book 5 Love Languages helped a lot in helping me realize people are just wired differently. They think differently. And when I can take what they're saying and the way they're acting and depersonalize it, in other words, I take out the fact that it's them against me, and I try to replace it with it's their wiring, it's their personality that's just in conflict with the way I think or the way my personality is wired, I can start to treat the situation with less emotion and less frustration. And when you can do that, when you can take the personal part out of it, the frustrations or the conflict is a lot easier to deal with. It's when we think that, hey, they're acting like that because they don't like me or they're trying to make me mad or they're just trying to be difficult. That's when we really get in trouble, and it's so hard to come to an agreement with someone. But I've had several individuals that I just knew were wired completely different than me. I got some tips from the different training I had to kind of read what their motivations might be and tried to treat them accordingly, and more often than not, came out pretty good.
Yeah, so you think about it just not as good or bad, but just different, I guess.
Correct. Exactly right.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, how important is it for us to do well in our work, and why?
Well, I think if you go back to Scripture where it says, in everything you do, do it as if you're serving the Lord. Do it enthusiastically for the Lord. I feel like it's very important. And I think, sometimes we tend to think, while this is not specific to your question, it's an example, we tend to think, well, ministry work is typically done by the church staff. They're more important, and they do well at that. I need to be good at something different. When instead, I think we're all called to be ministers. We're all called to have an impact on others and make disciples. So to do that, you have to be good at what you do, or at least you have to be working hard at it and get better at it. You cannot be lazy in your work and have an impact on others in the workplace, because you are ruining your witness, your credibility. So for me, 2 things that make me push hard to be good at work. One is it's not my business, it's God's business. I'm a steward of it. And therefore I need to bust my tail to make sure I'm running it and operating it in the best way possible because it's His. And then secondly, I want to make sure that everybody that's watching me sees me working hard at it and knows that I'm doing my best. Well, even if I'm not that great at it, I'm doing the absolute best I can. I'm not laying back and saying, hey, this is not that important. My ministry part's more important. That drives me as well.
Well, those are both excellent. And I just, on the second point, I was thinking about how you could say it's kind of a prerequisite for any other ministry you do to have that foundation of a good testimony of doing your best.
That's exactly right.
Yep. Okay, my next question is, can you give us one tip for how the average Spirit-led man can share the gospel at work?
Absolutely. And while it may not be what you're thinking, I'm not going to say, here's the ABC, here's the Romans road at work. What I actually believe is the truth is simply build relationships. The best way to share Christ at work is to I guess, one, act with integrity in everything that you do, so that those around you who are watching, whether you realize it or not, can see that you are above reproach. You're not perfect, but you are absolutely a man of integrity. And then secondly, that you are actively reaching out and building relationships with those around you. Regardless of position, regardless of differences in job or whatever, build relationships, engage these other people, and be strategic about it. There is nothing wrong with noticing that hey, I've got 4 guys on my team and 2 of them are strong Christians. I'm building relationships, stronger relationships with the other 2. Most of us would naturally gravitate toward the first 2 because, hey, we've got more in common. It'd be easier for us to hang out. But I think we need to be strategic about the 2 that are not. Build relationships, pour into them, and don't push. But when the time comes, when there's a need in their life, when there's a crisis, you're the one they're going to call. And at that point, they're opening the door, inviting you in, and that's when you can share most effectively about your faith.
That's excellent. Excellent advice. All right. My next question is, what is your favorite scripture? You might even call it your life verse, and tell us why it's your favorite.
Well, I've already shared it earlier, but it's 1 John 2:6, and it says, whoever claims to live in him must walk as Jesus did. And it's my favorite because it's so simple. There's not a lot of theology that you need to figure out what it's saying. It's basically saying, if you're going to claim to be a Christian, if you're going to claim to be a Christ follower, you need to walk as he did when he was here. And as best I can, that's what I want to do. I'm not perfect at it. I screw it up daily. But my goal is figuring out how in the world to live out as a business owner the very same way Jesus would if he were in my shoes. And that sounds trite. You know, you've heard the what would Jesus do for years, but it's that simple to me. And when we try to complicate it is when we get in trouble.
Makes a lot of sense to me. All right. My next question is, a lot of us are looking for better ways to leverage our commute to and from work every day. Can you give us a recommendation for 1 or 2 things that our listeners can listen to that can help them to be more spirit-led? Perhaps an audiobook, a podcast, some kind of app, or even music?
Sure. I've actually got a new product that's on my website. You'll be able to check it out there. It's at christianfaithatwork.com, and it's called the 17 Biblical Principles for Success. And a guy named Phil Taylor got together, 51 Christian business-minded people and broke them into groups of 3, and each group of 3 took on one of the 17 principles. And you've got integrity and compassion and love and so forth. And for an hour, 45 minutes to an hour, each of those groups of 3 tackles and discusses their best practices for those principles in the workplace. And it's just a fantastic resource. It just went up on my website about 30 days ago. So you can find it there. You can either order a hard copy or download. Aside from my own plug there, I would recommend any number of podcasts. For me, Andy Stanley is a great one. I also listen to Louis Giglio, and there are, I don't know if anybody's familiar with David Platt and Secret Church, but those are some pretty intensive ones. I'm not sure I would do those while driving. I ended up having to sit in a parking lot and listen to them because they're so full of content that I found I couldn't concentrate enough when driving. But, and then books. One in particular that I mentioned just a few minutes ago, What Would Jesus Do? The origin of that phrase came out of a book called In His Steps by Charles Sheldon, actually written back in the late 1800s, but it's been revised with current language, I guess, more recently than that. But a fantastic book about getting you to stop and think about, how do I approach what I do every day in regards to my faith? And that book taught me a lot. So I think it's a great question, because I think we need to maximize our time. And if we're doing a commute, 20, 30 minutes is a perfect amount of time or longer to pour into our brain and feed ourselves the good stuff, so we're thinking through it through the day.
I agree. Those are all excellent suggestions. So just to kind of wrap things up here, any final thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners?
I will. Dave, we've gone through a lot in this podcast, and we've covered a lot of ground. And I want to go back to one big point that did not come out, but I want to make sure I say to encourage those who might be listening and think, that's just too much. I can't do all that. 15 years ago, I was a Christian. Like I mentioned, I accepted Christ at 10 years old. 15 years ago, I was a Christian. I was running a business. I felt pretty good about where I was. I was engaged in church. Wasn't a bad guy. Wasn't faking it. It was real. But I wasn't digging into God's Word. I did not have a daily quiet time at all. I was going to church. I was going to be good based on what I was learning from the sermon, but that was my input. That was the extent of it. There was a dramatic change for me in October of 2000. And as a result, I made a very direct and specific commitment to a daily quiet time. And from that point forward to today and continuing on, I began a daily quiet time in the morning, reading the Word, prayer, study, that kind of thing. And over time, I can't even describe what I've learned and the change that's come in my heart and all the way out through what I do over that 15 years. It was an overnight lightning bolt experience that prompted me to commit to that quiet time, but the growth has come over the 15 years. And if you see yourself in this kind of situation, I just give you a strong recommendation. Follow the same path. Start now. If you've let it slide for a while, start again, recommit. But the daily pouring into our brains of God's Word and quiet time with Him, and whether it's morning or night, is a must if we want to change who we are.
Well, thanks for sharing that. That is so important and something that can certainly every one of us listening can take to heart. If anyone wants to reach out to you, get a hold of you, learn more about what you're all involved in, what would be the best way for them to do that?
So the first thing I would say is go to the website. It's Christian Faith at Work, and at is an AT, not the ampersand. ChristianFaithAtWork.com. And my email address is cpatton, P-A-T-T-O-N, at ChristianFaithAtWork.com. But you can reach me on the website. You can submit an email inquiry. You can read about coaching, speaking, that kind of thing. But also I'm on Twitter at Chris J. Patton, and then on LinkedIn as well. Would love to connect with anybody that wants to mention this podcast. Would be glad to do that. But like I said earlier, I'm exploring different ways that I can impact and teach other business owners to do the same thing, or non-business owners. I won't leave it specifically at that, but I'm wide open to contact and would love to get to talk with you.
Excellent. Thanks so much for the time, Chris, and you have a great evening.
Same to you, Dave. Thanks again.
Okay, bye. Men at Work, I hope you've enjoyed this interview as much as I have. We just heard about Chris Patton's journey being Spirit-led at his work. Each of our journeys are unique, but hopefully you've heard something in this episode to inspire you and give direction for your own personal daily work life. You can find links and other information from this show at spiritledmen.com/003. Until next time, have a great day and God bless.